At a lavish party, the millionaire makes a cruel joke about the tall maid, calling her a giraffe in front of everyone. The laughter echoes around the room, but inside, something begins to change. 2 hours later, he discovers something. That makes him faint instantly. If this story interested you, subscribe to our channel, don't forget to like this video, and tell us which city you're watching us from. We'll keep going. The crystal chandeliers cast an ethereal glow across the opulent penthouse, their light dancing off the champagne flutes and designer gowns of New York's elite. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sparkled like a blanket of stars, providing a backdrop worthy of the extravagant party thrown by Maxwell Richardson, one of Manhattan's most influential real estate moguls. Among the sea of affluent, guests Elena Martinez moved with practiced invisibility. Her tall, graceful figure and striking features could have easily commanded attention, but years of training had taught her the art of becoming unseen. As a housekeeper in the home of James Crawford, father of the party's host, she had mastered the delicate dance of serving without being noticed. The irony of her position wasn't lost on her. Every crystal glass she carried, every silver tray she balanced, belonged to a world that was rightfully hers, though no one in the room knew it. Eleanor was James Crawford's daughter, a secret kept buried beneath years of careful maneuvering and calculated decisions. She paused near a group of socialites, their laughter tinkling like the ice in their glasses. Their conversation drifted over to her as she collected empty champagne flutes. "Did you see the new wing James added to the children's hospital? The Crawford family just keeps outdoing themselves," one woman gushed, her diamonds catching the light as she gestured enthusiastically. "James has always been about legacy," another replied. "Everything he does is calculated to preserve the Crawford name." Elena's hand trembled slightly as she reached for another empty glass. If they only knew that the legacy they spoke of included her, the hidden daughter, the secret heir, the one who chose a life of service over a life of privilege. The weight of her decision pressed heavily on her shoulders as she made her way through the crowd. She had chosen this path years ago, desperate to escape the suffocating expectations that came with the Crawford name. Her father had reluctantly agreed, understanding her need for independence, but insisting on absolute secrecy to protect both her and the family's reputation. Maxwell Richardson's booming voice cut through her thoughts. He stood in the center of the room, commanding attention as naturally as breathing. His perfectly tailored suit and carefully styled hair spoke of a man accustomed to being noticed, to being admired. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out, raising his glass, "thank you all for coming to celebrate the successful merger of Richardson Industries and European markets. Tonight is about luxury, about success, and about showing the world that we know how to live well." The crowd responded with enthusiastic applause. Elena continued her rounds, keeping to the shadows of the room. She had nearly made it to the kitchen when Maxwell's voice rang out again, this time directed at her. "Hey you, the tall one." His words slurred slightly, betraying the number of drinks he'd consumed. "Yes, you, the giraffe in the uniform." Eleanor froze, her heart pounding against her ribs. She turned slowly, facing Maxwell as he approached, his expensive leather shoes clicking against the marble floor. "You know," he said loud enough for nearby guests to hear, "you should be careful not to hit your head on the chandeliers. Though I suppose that's why you're wearing that uniform instead of one of these lovely designer dresses. Can't find anything fancy in your size, can you?" Laughter rippled through the crowd, though some guests shifted uncomfortably. Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks, but years of practice kept her expression neutral. Inside, however, something shifted, a subtle but significant crack in the foundation of her carefully constructed facade. She watched as Maxwell basked in the come to attention, his self-satisfied smirk growing wider with each chuckle he earned. In that moment, she saw him clearly, not as the powerful businessman everyone feared and respected, but as a small man who built himself up by pushing others down. The crystal glasses on her tray clinked softly as she steadied her hands. She had spent years accepting such treatment, convincing herself it was the price of her chosen freedom. But standing there under the mocking gaze of Maxwell Richardson and his guests, Eleanor felt something new stirring in her chest, a quiet rebellion against the role she had accepted for herself. Without a word, she turned and walked toward the kitchen, her head held high despite the lingering laughter. But this time, her silence wasn't born of submission. Instead, it carried the weight of a decision forming in her mind, one that would soon shake the very foundations of the world she had chosen to hide from. The kitchen's fluorescent lights offered a harsh contrast to the warm glow of the party outside. Elena placed her tray on the steel counter, her hands finally allowing themselves to shake. The clink of crystal against metal echoed in the relative quiet of the staff area, a sound that seemed to mirror the fracturing of her resolve. "I saw what happened out there," came a soft voice. Maria, one of the other housekeepers, stepped out from behind the industrial refrigerator. Her kind eyes held a mixture of sympathy and concern. "That man, he has no right to treat anyone that way." Elena leaned against the counter, allowing herself a moment of vulnerability in the safety of the kitchen. "How long have we been doing this, Maria? How long have we been letting them treat us like we're less than human?" Maria moved closer, her experienced hands automatically beginning to organize the used glasses. "It's the way things are, mi querida. People like them. They don't see us. They don't want to see us." "But what if—" Elena paused, choosing her words carefully. "What if we're the ones choosing not to be seen? What if we're hiding ourselves? Because it's easier than standing up and demanding respect?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Through the kitchen's swinging doors, they could hear the continued revelry of the party. The clinking of glasses, the burst of laughter, the murmur of conversations worth millions of dollars. "Something's different about you tonight," Maria observed, studying Elena's face. "I've never heard you talk like this before." Elena turned to face her friend, years of carefully guarded secrets pressing against her lips. "I've been invisible for so long, Maria. Not just here, but in my own life. I've been hiding from who I am, convincing myself it was the right thing to do. And now..." Eleanor straightened up, her full height making her presence in the kitchen seem suddenly more commanding. "Now I'm wondering if I've been protecting myself or just hiding from the truth." The kitchen doors swung open and another server rushed in, carrying empty plates. The brief glimpse of the party showed Maxwell Richardson holding court near the windows, his expensive watch catching the light as he gestured animatedly to his audience. "You know," Maria said thoughtfully, "I've worked in houses like this for 20 years. So I've seen all types of rich people, the cruel ones, the kind ones, the ones who pretend to be kind but aren't. But people like Maxwell Richardson, they're the worst kind. They think their money makes them untouchable." Elena watched through the door's window as Maxwell threw his head back in laughter, probably at another cruel joke. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe they need to learn that money can't buy everything. It can't buy the right to treat people like they're nothing. A commotion from the party drew their attention. Through the kitchen doors, they could see several guests gathering around Maxwell as he prepared to make another speech. Elena felt her heart rate increase, knowing that any moment now he might decide to aim another barb in her direction. "What are you going to do?" Maria asked, sensing the shift in Elena's energy. Elena squared her shoulders, years of practiced submission, warring with a lifetime of suppressed strength. "I don't know yet, but I know I can't keep living like this. I can't keep pretending to be less than I am just because it makes others comfortable." The weight of her secret pressed against her chest. The truth about her identity, about her father, about the life she had chosen to leave behind. For years she had convinced herself that working as a housekeeper was a form of freedom, an escape from the pressures of being a Crawford. But standing in that kitchen, with the sounds of privilege and power echoing through the doors, she began to see it differently. "Sometimes," she continued, more to herself than to Maria, "we think we're running away from something, when really, we're just hiding from ourselves." Maria touched her arm gently. "Whatever you're thinking, whatever you're planning, be careful. People like them, they don't like it when the natural order of things gets disrupted." Elena smiled, a small, determined expression that held years of quiet strength. Maybe it's time for a new natural order. Maybe it's time for all of us to stop being invisible. The kitchen doors swung open again, and the sound of Maxwell's voice carried through, loud and demanding. "Where's that tall drink of water? We need more champagne out here." Elena exchanged a look with Maria, then reached for a fresh tray of champagne flutes. But this time, as she prepared to step back into the party, something had changed. The invisible wall that had kept her separate from that world for so long was beginning to crack, and through those cracks, a new possibility was emerging, one where she no longer needed to hide in the shadows of her own life. From his position near the floor-to-ceiling windows, Maxwell Richardson watched his empire of influence begin to crack, though he hadn't yet realized it. The champagne in his crystal flute had lost its fizz, much like the attention he usually commanded so effortlessly. Something had shifted in the atmosphere of his perfectly orchestrated party, but he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. "Maxwell," called out Charles Bennett, a longtime business associate, "have you noticed the crowd seems different tonight?" The older man gestured subtly toward the gathering of guests, who had begun to cluster in small groups, their conversations more hushed than usual. Maxwell took another sip of his flat champagne, trying to mask his growing discomfort. "Different how, Charles? Everyone seems to be enjoying themselves as always." But even as he spoke the words, he felt their hollowness. "I don't know," Charles mused, adjusting his gold cufflinks. "That comment earlier about the staff, it didn't land quite the way your jokes usually do." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Times are changing, Maxwell. People are more conscious these days." The observation stung more than Maxwell cared to admit. He had built his reputation on being the life of these parties, the man whose sharp wit and sharper tongue kept everyone entertained. Now, he noticed, the slight turns of shoulders as he approached groups of guests, the way conversations seemed to dim rather than brighten at his presence. "Nonsense," he declared, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "I know these people, Charles. They appreciate someone who's not afraid to speak their mind, who can add a little spice to these otherwise dull affairs." A young woman in a red designer dress passed by, her phone clutched in her manicured hands. Maxwell caught a glimpse of her screen. She was typing something about disgusting behavior and privilege. His stomach tightened as he wondered if she was referring to his earlier comment. He made his way to the bar, signaling for another drink. As the bartender poured his scotch, Maxwell observed the room with growing unease. Small clusters of guests were engaged in animated discussions, their eyes occasionally darting in his direction before quickly looking away. "Sir," the bartender ventured, his voice low, "I couldn't help but overhear. That tall housekeeper you mentioned earlier. She's quite well respected among the staff. Been here for years, actually." Maxwell waved his hand dismissively, but the bartender's words added to his mounting discomfort. He hadn't expected anyone to care about a simple joke at a servant's expense. That's all it had been, a joke, wasn't it? Near the entrance, he spotted Victoria Chen, a prominent social media influencer, known for her massive following and sharp commentary on social issues. She was recording something on her phone, her expression serious as she spoke in hushed tones. Maxwell felt his pulse quicken. In today's world, one viral post could unravel years of carefully cultivated influence. He loosened his tie slightly, feeling the weight of unseen eyes upon him. The party continued around him, but it felt different now, as if he were watching it through a distorted lens. The laughter seemed hollow, the smiles forced, the conversations strained. "Maxwell," called out another voice, "Jonathan Hayes, his biggest investor. A word if you don't mind." The tone was friendly enough, but Maxwell detected an undercurrent of concern that made him nervous. As he followed Jonathan to a quieter corner of the room, Maxwell caught sight of Elena moving efficiently through the crowd with a fresh tray of drinks. There was something about her now that he hadn't noticed before, a quiet dignity that seemed to command more respect than his loud declarations ever had. "Listen," Jonathan began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I know you're used to being colorful in your commentary, but the world is watching now, Maxwell. Every word, every gesture, every moment can be captured and shared with millions in an instant. Maxwell felt the scotch turn sour in his stomach. It was just a bit of fun, Jonathan. Everyone knows I like to keep things lively. Do they? Jonathan raised an eyebrow. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you might have misread the room, rather significantly. The words hit Maxwell like a physical blow. He had always prided himself on his ability to read people, to know exactly what they wanted and needed from him. Now, looking around his own party, he felt like a stranger in a foreign land. Elena passed by again, and this time Maxwell noticed something else, the way other guests seemed to watch her with a mix of admiration and shame. She moved through the space with an innate grace that made his earlier comments seem not just cruel but deeply foolish. He reached for his phone, scrolling through his social media feeds. Already there were whispers online about the incident. Nothing viral yet, but the potential was there, simmering beneath the surface of every shared post and hastily typed comment. The crystal chandeliers suddenly felt too bright, the music too loud, the air too thick with perfume and pretense. Maxwell Richardson, king of his self-made domain, was beginning to realize that perhaps he wasn't as untouchable as he had always believed, and somewhere in the back of his mind, a small voice whispered that this might be just the beginning of his troubles. James Crawford stood in his private study, watching the city lights twinkle through the bulletproof glass of his penthouse window. His phone lay heavy in his hand, displaying a text message from Elena. "We need to talk tomorrow morning." The brevity of the message concerned him. In all the years since Elena had chosen her path, their communications had been careful, measured, always maintaining the delicate balance between father and daughter, employer and employee. This message felt different, urgent, decisive. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called out, knowing exactly who it would be. Martha, his trusted assistant of 30 years, entered with a tablet in hand. "Sir, you might want to see this," she said, her voice carefully neutral. She handed him the tablet open to a social media feed. Videos and posts from Maxwell's party were already circulating, focusing on one particular moment, his godson's tasteless joke at Elena's expense. James felt his jaw tighten as he watched the clips. "Has Elena seen these?" "I believe so, sir. The staff are talking about it, and it's gaining traction online. Some of the guests are being quite vocal in their criticism of Maxwell." He placed the tablet on his mahogany desk, next to the framed photo he kept face down, a picture of Elena's mother holding their newborn daughter, taken just days before circumstances forced them to make impossible choices. 25 years. "Martha," he said quietly. 25 years we've protected her, kept her safe from all of this." He gestured to the tablet, to the world of social media and public scrutiny that could tear down reputations in minutes. Martha stepped closer, her years of service giving her the right to speak freely. "With all due respect, sir, perhaps she doesn't need protection anymore. Elena is a grown woman, and from what I've observed, she's stronger than anyone gives her credit for." James moved to his desk, sinking into the leather chair that had witnessed countless business decisions, but none as personal as this. "You didn't see what they did to her mother, Martha. The media, the society vultures, they destroyed her. I won't let that happen to Elena." "Times have changed," Martha reminded him gently. "And Elena isn't her mother. She chose this path for herself, remember? Against your wishes, she decided to live life on her own terms." The memory of that conversation years ago surfaced in James's mind. Eleanor, barely 20, standing in this very office, declaring her intention to work as a housekeeper rather than step into her role as a Crawford heir. He had argued, pleaded, but ultimately respected her choice with conditions. "Complete privacy," he murmured, remembering his requirements. No one could know who she really was. It was the only way to keep her safe. Martha's voice carried a hint of challenge. "Safe from what, Mr. Crawford? From living her true life, from standing up for herself?" Before James could respond, his phone buzzed with another message from Elena. "I can't keep hiding, Dad. Not anymore." The words sent a chill through him. He had always known this day might come, had prepared for it in theory, but the reality of it, the potential consequences, the media frenzy, the impact on both their lives, felt overwhelming. "Sir," Martha said, her voice softer now. "Maybe it's time to trust her. Really trust her, not just with her choices, but with her own strength." James picked up the face-down frame, looking at the image he both treasured and feared. Eleanor's mother smiled back at him, her eyes full of the same determination he'd seen in their daughter's gaze lately. "Maxwell's behavior tonight," Martha continued, "it's brought something to the surface. Something that's been building for a while, I think." "You've noticed it too?" James asked, though he already knew the answer. The subtle changes in Elena's demeanor, the growing steel in her spine, the way she carried herself with increasing confidence, now all signs that the carefully constructed walls were beginning to crumble. "Everyone has noticed, sir. The staff respect her not because she's your daughter, but because of who she is. They look up to her, even without knowing her true identity." James stood again, moving back to the window. Somewhere out there, his daughter was preparing to shake the foundations of the world they'd built around her, the world he'd helped her hide in, believing it was for her own good. "Martha," he said finally, "I need you to prepare some documents. Legal papers, press statements, everything we might need if—" He trailed off, unable to complete the thought. "Already done, sir," Martha replied with a small smile. "I took the liberty of updating them last month. I had a feeling we might need them soon." James couldn't help but chuckle despite his concern. "You always could read the signs better than I could." "That's because I watch without trying to control," she said gently. "Maybe that's what Elena needs from you now, not protection, but support. Not direction, but understanding." The city lights continued to twinkle outside, unchanging despite the seismic shifts occurring in the lives they illuminated. James Crawford, one of New York's most powerful men, found himself facing a truth he had long tried to avoid. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't in protecting someone from the world, but in letting them face it on their own terms. The morning sun streamed through the windows of James Crawford's private conference room, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany table where Elena sat, her back straight and her hands folded neatly in front of her. She was no longer wearing her uniform, but instead had chosen a simple yet elegant navy blue dress, a subtle statement that this meeting would be different from their usual encounters. "The video has over 2 million views now," Eleanor said quietly, sliding her phone across the table to her father. "Victoria Chen's post alone has been shared hundreds of thousands of times." James picked up the phone, his expression tightening as he read the comments scrolling beneath the video. "Eleanor, we can handle this. We can have it taken down, issue statements, control the narrative." "That's not why I'm here," Eleanor interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. "I'm not here to ask for your help in hiding anymore." The morning light caught the silver in James's hair as he leaned back in his chair, studying his daughter's face. "What exactly are you planning to do?" Elena took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. "I'm going to resign from my position here, not just as a housekeeper, but from this entire pretense we've created." "And then what?" James asked, his voice carefully controlled. "You'll announce to the world that you're my daughter? That you've been working as a servant in your own family's home? The media will tear you apart." A small smile played at the corners of Elena's mouth. Will they? Or will they be more interested in why a powerful man like James Crawford felt the need to hide his daughter in plain sight for all these years? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken implications. James stood, moving to the window that overlooked the city he had helped build. "I did what I thought was best for you, after what happened with your mother." "I know," Elena said softly. "You thought you were protecting me. But Dad, look at what that protection has cost. Not just me, but every person who's ever been treated the way Maxwell treated me last night. Every person who's been made to feel small, invisible, unworthy." James turned back to face her, his expression pained. "You're talking about turning your personal revelation into some kind of social statement. I'm talking about being honest, about standing up, about showing people that worth isn't determined by what uniform you wear or what position you hold." Elena stood, moving to join her father at the window. "Last night something changed," Not just for me, but for everyone who witnessed Maxwell's behavior. The world is changing, Dad. People are tired of the old power structures, the casual cruelty, the assumption that money equals right. And you think exposing yourself to public scrutiny is the answer, James challenged. Though his tone held more worry than anger, Eleanor touched her father's arm gently. I think hiding is no longer the answer. You taught me that the Crawford name means something, that it carries responsibility, dignity, influence. Maybe it's time to use that influence for something meaningful. The door opened quietly, and Martha entered with a stack of folders. She paused, taking in the scene before her. The papers you requested, Mr. Crawford, and Elena. There's something else you should see. She handed Elena a tablet. On the screen was a new post from Victoria Chen, this one, featuring a series of interviews with other service workers who had experienced similar treatment from their wealthy employers. The hashtag #InvisibleNoMore was trending. It's already becoming a movement, Martha observed. People are speaking up, sharing their stories. Elena handed the tablet back to Martha, her decision crystallizing in her mind. This is bigger than me now, bigger than our family name or your fears for my safety. This is about every person who's ever been made to feel less than human because of their job or their position in life. James ran a hand through his silver hair, a gesture that reminded Elena so much of herself. You're as stubborn as your mother, he said finally, a mix of pride and resignation in his voice. I'll take that as a compliment, Elena replied with a small smile. She never backed down from what she believed in either. If we do this, James said slowly, we do it right. No half measures, no room for misinterpretation. We control the narrative from the start. Elena shook her head. No, Dad, no more. Controlling, no more managing, just truth, raw, honest, uncomfortable truth. It's the only way to make real change. A notification pinged on Elena's phone. Another message from Maria. The staff is talking, they're inspired, they're ready for change. Elena looked out at the city stretching before them, the morning sun glinting off countless windows, each one potentially hiding its own story of invisible struggles and quiet dignity. It's time, she said simply. James studied his daughter's profile, seeing in it the strength he had always tried to protect, the determination he had inadvertently taught her to hide. Finally, he nodded. Then let's make sure you have everything you need for what comes next. Elena turned to face him fully. What I need, Dad, is for you to trust me, to let me do this my way. Can you do that? The question hung between them, weighted with years of protection and secrets, of love expressed through control and safety sought through silence. The answer would change everything, not just for them, but for countless others who were waiting, for someone to show them it was possible to step out of the shadows and into their own light. Victoria Chen's penthouse office offered a different view of New York, one filled with ring lights, cameras, and screens displaying real-time social media metrics. She leaned back in her ergonomic chair, studying the analytics of her posts from Maxwell Richardson's party. The numbers were unlike anything she'd seen before. 2 million views and climbing, her assistant reported, swiping through various platforms. The comments are overwhelming. Everyone wants to know more about the woman in the video. Victoria nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. As one of the most followed social media influencers in New York, she had built her career on identifying moments that could spark real change. This felt different, bigger, more significant than her usual content. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Meet me at the Blue Door Cafe in an hour. I have more to the story. Eleanor. Victoria's pulse quickened. She had been hoping for this, waiting for the mysterious housekeeper to reach out. There was something about Eleanor that didn't quite fit the narrative of a simple service worker. The way she had carried herself, her subtle reactions to Maxwell's crude joke, the quiet authority she commanded without seeming to realize it. An hour later, Victoria sat in a quiet corner of the Blue Door Cafe, her designer sunglasses doing little to disguise her from curious onlookers who recognized her. When Eleanor walked in, Victoria was struck again by her presence. There was an undeniable elegance in her movements that spoke of something more than her current position suggested. Thank "You for meeting me," Elena said, sliding into the seat across from Victoria. "I've seen your posts about last night." Victoria studied her carefully. "They're resonating with people in a way I've never seen before. Your story, or at least what little people know of it, has touched something deep in the public consciousness." "That's why I'm here," Elena replied, her voice steady. "Because it's not just my story. It's the story of countless others who have been treated as less than human because of their jobs, their positions, their circumstances." Victoria leaned forward, her instincts telling her she was about to get more than just a follow-up interview. "There's something else, isn't there? Something you haven't told anyone yet?" Elena's fingers traced patterns on the ceramic coffee cup before her. "What if I told you that the woman Maxwell Richardson mocked last night isn't just a housekeeper? What if I told you she's actually the daughter of one of New York's most powerful men?" Victoria's eyes widened slightly, her mind already racing through the implications. "You're talking about yourself, aren't you? But why? Why work as a housekeeper if I'm privileged, if I'm wealthy?" Eleanor finished the thought. "Because sometimes the only way to understand the truth about a system is to experience it from the bottom up. Because sometimes the greatest act of rebellion is choosing to be exactly what society tells you you're too good to be." The cafe hummed with quiet conversation around them, but Victoria barely noticed. Her years of experience in media told her she was sitting on what could be the biggest story of her career. But something in Elena's demeanor told her this wasn't about creating viral content. This was about something much more fundamental. "People are already sharing their stories," Victoria said, pulling out her phone to show Elena the growing number of posts under the "High Arcs Invisible No More" hashtag. Service workers, housekeepers, waiters, retail workers, they're all talking about their experiences with wealthy clients and employers. Elena nodded, her expression thoughtful. "That's exactly why this matters. It's not just about exposing one man's cruelty or revealing my true identity. It's about challenging the entire system that makes people think it's acceptable to treat others as less than human because of their job title." "When do you want to go public?" Victoria asked, her mind already formulating strategies for maximum impact. "Soon," Elena replied. "But not through a carefully orchestrated media campaign, not through professionally crafted statements and controlled narratives. This needs to be real, raw, honest." Victoria set her phone down, really looking at the woman across from her. "You understand what you're risking? Once this gets out, there's no going back. Your life will never be the same." A small smile played at Elena's lips. "My life hasn't been my own for years. Maybe it's time to change that. Not just for me, but for everyone who's ever felt trapped by society's expectations and prejudices." Outside, the Café New York continued its endless rush, unaware that within its midst a quiet revolution was taking shape. A revolution that would begin not with grand gestures or loud proclamations, but with one woman's decision to step out of the shadows and into her own truth. Maxwell Richardson sat in his darkened office, illuminated only by the glow of multiple screens displaying social media feeds, news articles, and email notifications. His perfectly curated world was unraveling thread by thread, and for the first time in his life, his money couldn't buy him a solution. "Sir," his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, "Mr. Hayes is here to see you." Maxwell pressed the button harder than necessary. "Send him in." Jonathan Hayes entered the office, his usually immaculate appearance showing signs of strain. As the head of Hayes Investments, he had been one of Maxwell's strongest supporters. Now he looked like a man carrying unwelcome news. "Have you seen the latest numbers?" Jonathan asked without preamble, placing a tablet on Maxwell's desk. Maxwell didn't need to look. He'd been watching his company's stock price drop steadily since the video went viral. "It's a temporary setback. The media cycle will move on." "This isn't going away, Maxwell," Jonathan interrupted, his voice sharp with frustration. "3 major clients have already pulled their investments. The board is calling for an emergency meeting. And now—" He paused, running a hand through his graying hair. "Now what?" "Now there's a movement building. So invisible no more. It's trending nationwide. Your incident has become a rallying cry for service workers everywhere. They're sharing stories, organizing protests. The unions are getting involved. Maxwell stood abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked the city he'd always thought he owned. All this over one joke, one moment at one party? It wasn't just a joke, Maxwell. It was a symbol of arrogance, of privilege, of everything people are tired of. And that woman, Jonathan's voice trailed off meaningfully. The housekeeper. Maxwell turned back to face his friend. What about her? There's something about her. The way she handled it. Her dignity in the face of your behavior. People are captivated. They want to know more about her, and there are whispers. Maxwell's stomach tightened. What kind of whispers? That there's more to her story than meets the eye, that she might be connected to someone powerful. The media is digging, Maxwell. And they're not just looking at her, they're looking at everyone involved, including you. The implications hung heavy in the air. Maxwell's past, his business dealings, his relationships, everything could come under scrutiny. We need to get ahead of this, Jonathan continued, his tone softening slightly. Issue a proper apology, make a substantial donation to workers' rights organizations, show real contrition. Contrition? Maxwell spat the word out like it tasted bitter. I built this empire from nothing. I don't owe anyone an apology for who I am. Who you are is precisely the problem right now, Jonathan replied quietly. The world is changing, Maxwell. The old ways, your ways, they don't work anymore. Maxwell's phone buzzed with another notification, another client pulling out, another contract cancelled, another piece of his carefully constructed world falling away. Sir, his assistant's voice came through again. The board members are requesting to move the emergency meeting up to tomorrow morning. Jonathan moved toward the door, pausing before he left. You have a choice to make, Maxwell. You can either adapt to this new reality, or you can let your pride destroy everything you've built. Alone again in his darkened office, Maxwell refreshed his social media feed. The hashtag #InvisibleNoMore had grown exponentially in the past hour. Below it, a new trending topic caught his eye. Who is Elena? His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he considered his options. He could fight back, use his resources to dig up dirt on the housekeeper, try to discredit the movement before it. Gained more momentum. But something stopped him. A memory of Elena's face in that moment at the party, the quiet strength in her posture, the way others had looked at her with respect rather than pity. The phone on his desk rang. His publicity team, no doubt, with another strategy to contain the damage. But as Maxwell stared at the flashing light, he realized that for the first time in his life, he didn't know how to fix what he had broken. In the reflection of his office window, he caught sight of himself, impeccably dressed, perfectly groomed, every inch the successful businessman. But underneath that polished exterior, cracks were beginning to show. The carefully maintained facade of power and control was crumbling, revealing something he had spent his entire life trying to hide: vulnerability. His computer pinged with a new email notification. The subject line made his blood run cold. Board vote scheduled, leadership review. Maxwell Richardson, who had spent his life looking down on others, was about to learn what it felt like to fall from heights of his own making. The staff quarters of the Crawford mansion buzzed with an energy Maria had never seen before. Housekeepers, gardeners, kitchen staff, everyone was gathered around various phones and tablets, watching as their movement gained momentum across social media. "Look at this," one of the younger maids exclaimed, holding up her phone. "People are sharing stories from all over the country. It's not just about us anymore." Maria watched the excitement build among her colleagues, but her eyes kept drifting to Elena's empty locker. After 20 years of service, she had learned to read the subtle signs of change in the household, and something significant was brewing. Her phone vibrated with a text from Eleanor. "Can you meet me at St. Patrick's Cathedral? I need your help with something important." 30 minutes later, Maria found Elena sitting in one of the back pews, the cathedral's grand architecture providing a fitting backdrop for what she sensed would be a momentous conversation. "You've figured it out, haven't you?" Elena asked as Maria sat beside her. No preamble needed between old friends. Maria smiled softly. "I've known for years, Mijita. A mother knows another mother's child when she sees one. You have Isabella's eyes. Elena turned to her friend in surprise. You knew my mother? I worked here when she was still alive, Maria nodded. She was different from the other society women, kind, genuine, always treating us as equals. When you first came to work here, I saw her in you immediately. Tears welled in Elena's eyes. Why didn't you ever say anything? It wasn't my secret to tell, Maria replied simply, but I watched you, protected you in my own way. I saw how you struggled with the weight of your identity, how you tried to find yourself in a world that wanted to define you by your name alone. The late afternoon sun filtered through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the stone floor. I'm going to tell everyone the truth, Elena said quietly. Not just about who I am, but about why I chose this path. Maria took Elena's hand in hers. And what will you tell them? That you, a Crawford heir, chose to work as a housekeeper because I needed to understand, Elena answered, her voice growing stronger. I needed to know what it was like to be on the other side of privilege, to experience firsthand how people like Maxwell Richardson treat those they consider beneath them. And now that you know? Eleanor stood, moving to stand in a shaft of colored light. Now I know that true worth has nothing to do with bank accounts or family names. I've watched you, Maria, how you carry yourself with dignity no matter how others treat you, how you find joy in your work despite the challenges, how you've built a community among the staff that's stronger than any business alliance I've ever seen. The world won't understand, Maria warned gently. They'll say you were playing at being poor, that you can't possibly understand our struggles when you could walk away at any time. But I didn't walk away, Elena countered. I stayed. I lived it. I earned every callus on my hands, every ache in my back. And yes, I had a safety net that others don't have. That's precisely why I have to speak up now. Maria studied the young woman before her, seeing both the privileged daughter and the hard-working housekeeper she had become. What do you need from me? Your blessing, Eleanor replied softly. Your support. When this story breaks, people will look to you and the others to verify my experience, to validate my authenticity. You already have it, mi amor, Maria said, rising to embrace her friend. You earned it long before I knew you were a Crawford. You earned it by being one of us, by sharing our struggles, our joys, our daily victories and defeats. As they held each other in the sacred space, their embrace symbolized something larger than just two friends supporting each other. It represented a bridge between two worlds that had long been separated by wealth, status, and prejudice. Victoria Chen wants to release the story tomorrow, Elena said as they separated. But before that, I need to gather everyone, all the staff, everyone who's been part of this journey without knowing it. They deserve to hear the truth from me first. Maria nodded, understanding the importance of this gesture. I'll help you. Arrange it. We can use the old ballroom after hours. Everyone will come. They all want to be part of this moment. As they walked out of the cathedral together, they passed a group of tourists taking photos of the magnificent architecture. Elena paused, looking back at the grand building. You know what I've learned in all these years of serving others? She asked Maria. What's that? That the most powerful changes don't come from grand gestures or dramatic declarations. They come from small acts of dignity, from refusing to be diminished, from standing tall even when others try to make you feel small. Maria squeezed her hand. Like a tall, graceful woman who wouldn't let a cruel joke break her spirit? Elena smiled, feeling the weight of her impending revelation balanced by the strength of her conviction. Exactly like that. Now let's go make some changes of our own. The Crawford Mansion's grand ballroom, usually reserved for society's most exclusive events, now held a different kind of gathering. As the evening sun cast long shadows through the towering windows, household staff from every department filed in quietly, their curious whispers echoing off the gilded walls. Elena stood in the adjacent room, her heart pounding against her ribs. Maria squeezed her hand reassuringly. Are you ready, querida? I've been preparing for this moment for years, Elena replied, smoothing down her simple black dress. No uniform tonight. I just never thought it would come like this. Through the partially open door, they could see James Crawford standing. At the back of the ballroom, his presence causing speculation among the staff. It was unusual for him to attend any gathering of household employees. Everyone's here, Martha announced, entering the room with her tablet. And Elena, you should see this. She held out the device displaying Victoria Chen's latest social media update. Breaking news, the truth about Yash Hu Iselina comes tomorrow. A story that will change how we see privilege, power, and dignity in modern America. Elena took a deep breath. No turning back now. You don't have to do this, James said quietly from the doorway, having slipped in unnoticed. We can still find another way. Elena turned to face her father, seeing in his eyes the same protective instinct that had shaped both their lives for so long. Dad, do you remember what Mum used to say about truth? A small smile softened James's features. Truth isn't just about facts, he quoted. It's about having the courage to live authentically. I'm not just doing this for me, Elena continued. Look at them. She gestured toward the ballroom where her colleagues, her friends, waited. Every person in that room has a story of dignity in the face of dismissal, of strength under scrutiny. They deserve to know that someone from your world, our world, sees them, truly sees them. Martha cleared her throat softly. It's time. Elena nodded, squaring her shoulders. As she moved toward the ballroom doors, she caught her reflection in a gilded mirror. Not quite the housekeeper anymore, not quite the heiress, but something new, something authentic. The room fell silent as she entered, all eyes turning to her. These were people she had worked alongside for years, sharing early morning shifts and late night cleanups, celebrating their children's graduations and mourning their parents' passings. They had known her as Elena the housekeeper, but they had never known her whole truth. She took her place at the front of the room, the crystal chandelier, above casting a soft glow that seemed to illuminate her from within. Maria and Martha stood supportively to one side, while James remained in the shadows near the back. Thank you all for coming, Elena began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. For many of you, I've been a colleague, a friend, someone who shared your daily struggles and celebrations, but I haven't been completely honest about who I am. A murmur rippled through the crowd. In the middle of the group, Carlos, the head groundskeeper who had taught Elena how to tend the rose garden during her first year, leaned forward intently. Tomorrow, a story will break in the media that will change everything. Not just for me, but for all of us. Before that happens, you deserve to hear the truth from me directly. She paused, looking at the familiar faces before her. My name is Elena Crawford. I am James Crawford's daughter. The silence that followed was absolute. Elena could see the shock registering on faces, could almost hear the mental calculations as people recalled their interactions with her over the years. But she wasn't finished. I chose to work here, to live this life, not as some social experiment or rich girl's whim, but because I needed to understand something fundamental about our world. I needed to know what it meant to be viewed as invisible, to be treated as less than human simply because of the uniform you wear or the job you do. She moved forward closer to her audience. What I discovered was something far more powerful than any lesson about privilege or class. I found a community of people who taught me more about dignity, resilience, and true worth than any boardroom or society gathering ever could. In the crowd, she saw tears in some eyes, recognition in others. Mrs. Chen, the head cook who had bandaged Elena's burned fingers during her first week in the kitchen, nodded slowly, a proud smile spreading across her face. The viral video from Maxwell Richardson's party wasn't just about one man's cruelty or one woman's humiliation. It was about a system that makes such behavior possible, that normalizes the dehumanization of people based on their profession or position. Elena's voice grew stronger, filled with purpose. Tomorrow, when this story breaks, the media will try to make it about me, the secret heiress who chose to be a servant. But this isn't just my story, it's our story. It's about every person in this room who has maintained their dignity in the face of disrespect, who has found strength in solidarity, who has built a family among colleagues. She could see understanding dawning on faces throughout the room, could feel the energy shifting from shock to something more powerful: recognition, validation, pride. I'm standing here now, revealing my truth, because it's time for change. Real change, not just hashtags and viral videos, but fundamental change in how we see and treat each other. And I'm asking for your help to make that change happen. The silence that had gripped the room began to break, replaced by a growing murmur of voices, of questions forming, of realizations taking shape. Elena stood steady, ready to face whatever came next, knowing that this moment, this truth, was just the beginning of something much larger than herself. As Elena's words echoed through the ballroom, the first response came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Chen, the head cook, stepped forward, her small frame somehow commanding attention from everyone in the room. "I knew," she said simply, her voice carrying clearly in the hushed space. "I knew the first time you came into my kitchen, burning your fingers on hot pans but never complaining, always asking to learn more. You had the same quiet strength as your mother." A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. Mrs. Chen continued, "Isabella Crawford used to come to the kitchen late at night, sharing tea with me, asking about my family, my life. She never acted superior, never made us feel less than her. And neither have you, Elena." Carlos, the groundskeeper, stepped forward next. "This explains so much," he said, his weathered face breaking into a warm smile. "The way you worked, it wasn't just about doing a job. You were trying to understand us, weren't you?" Elena nodded, emotion thick in her throat. "I was trying to understand myself too. Who I was beyond my name, beyond my privilege. You all taught me what real strength looks like." From the back of the room, James Crawford watched the scene unfold, seeing his daughter in a new light. The staff, his employees for decades, were not reacting with anger or betrayal as he had feared. Instead, there was a growing sense of pride, of shared purpose. "What happens tomorrow?" someone called out. "When the story breaks?" Eleanor moved to the center of the room, her presence both familiar and somehow different now. "Tomorrow, everything changes. The media will try to spin this their way, but we have the chance to tell our own story. A story about dignity, about respect, about the true meaning of worth." Martha stepped forward, tablet in hand. "We're already seeing the impact. The invisible no more movement has spread to other cities. Service workers are organizing, sharing their experiences. What started with Maxwell Richardson's cruelty has become a catalyst for real change. But we need your help," Elena continued. "Your stories, your experiences, your truth, they matter. Every person in this room has faced discrimination, dismissal, disrespect. Together we can show the world that the uniform someone wears doesn't determine their value." Maria watched from the side as the energy in the room shifted. The initial shock of Elena's revelation was transforming into something more powerful, a sense of possibility, of potential. "I have a question," said Kevin, one of the younger valets. "All these years you could have been living the easy life, giving orders instead of taking them. Why choose this?" Elena's answer came without hesitation. "Because there is no easy life worth living if it means accepting the dehumanization of others. I chose this path because I needed to understand the truth about our world, not from above, but from within." The room fell quiet again, absorbing her words. Then, slowly, people began to move forward, forming a circle around Elena. It wasn't planned, wasn't orchestrated, but it felt right. A physical manifestation of the bonds that had formed over years of shared work, shared struggles, shared life. "Whatever comes tomorrow," Mrs. Chen said firmly, "we stand with you." James Crawford finally stepped out of the shadows, moving to stand beside his daughter. The staff parted respectfully, but there was a new quality to their deference. Not the automatic submission of employees to an employer, but the recognition of a moment of transformation. "Eleanor," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the room, "your mother would be proud. Not just of your courage in revealing the truth, but of the way you've lived it all these years. As father and daughter stood together in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by the people who had been both Elena's colleagues and her teachers, the last rays of sunset streamed through the windows, bathing the scene in golden light. Tomorrow would bring chaos, media storms, public scrutiny, countless questions and challenges. But in this moment, in this room, something profound had already changed. The truth, once spoken, could never be unspoken. And sometimes, the most powerful revolutions begin not with grand declarations or violent upheavals, but with simple moments of honest recognition between human beings who have finally seen each other for who they truly are. The morning sun had barely touched the New York skyline when Victoria Chen's story went live. Within minutes, Das Elena Crawford and Charm Invisible No More were trending worldwide. The carefully produced video began with a simple image. Elena, dressed in her housekeeper's uniform, standing in front of the Crawford mansion. "My name is Elena Crawford," her voice rang clear and confident, "and this is my story of choosing to be invisible in order to truly see." In her penthouse office, Victoria watched as the view counts skyrocketed. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing since the story dropped. Calls from major networks, requests for interviews, messages from social media influencers wanting to join the movement. But it was the comments section that truly caught her attention. "I've been a housekeeper for 30 years. Today, for the first time, I feel seen." This isn't just about one wealthy heiress, it's about all of us who've been treated as invisible. Finally, someone from their world understands our reality. Eleanor sat in her father's study, watching the story unfold on multiple screens. James stood behind her, his hand resting supportively on her shoulder. The morning news shows were already picking up the story, their headlines ranging from sensational, "Billionaire's daughter's secret double life," to thoughtful, "Class, dignity, and the revolution of visibility." "Are you ready for this?" James asked softly. Elena nodded, her eyes fixed on a particular news segment where Maxwell Richardson's party video was playing alongside clips from her interview with Victoria. "I've been ready for years, Dad. I just didn't know it until now." Martha entered the study, her tablet displaying a cascade of notifications. "The major networks are all requesting exclusive interviews. The morning shows want you live via satellite, and..." She paused, a small smile playing at her lips. "The staff from every major hotel and residence in Manhattan are organizing a gathering in Central Park. They're calling it the Stand Tall Rally." Elena stood, moving to the window. Below, she could already see news vans gathering at the mansion's gates. What about the others? Has anyone heard from them? As if in answer to her question, Maria burst into the study, her face alight with excitement. "Elena, you need to see this." She held up her phone, showing a live social media feed. All across the city, service workers were posting photos of themselves standing tall, heads held high with the caption, "We stand with Elena." The movement was spreading beyond New York. Photos were coming in from Chicago, Los Angeles, Miami, even international cities. "This is bigger than we imagined," James observed, his voice a mixture of pride and concern. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Chen. "The kitchen staff at the Waldorf are walking out in solidarity. They're demanding better treatment, respect, dignity. You've started something, child." Meanwhile, in his own office, Maxwell Richardson watched his world continue to crumble. The board meeting had been brutal. His leadership was questioned, his judgment criticized, his position as CEO hanging by a thread. But it was the revelation about Elena that hit him hardest. His assistant entered tentatively. "Sir, the press is requesting a statement about Elena Crawford. They want to know if you knew who she was when I humiliated her at my party." Maxwell finished bitterly. He turned to the window, seeing his own reflection overlaid on the city beyond. The man who looked back at him seemed smaller somehow, diminished by his own arrogance. Back at the Crawford mansion, Eleanor prepared for her first live interview. As the makeup artist worked, she could hear the growing crowd outside. Not just media, but scores of service workers who had come to show their support. "Miss Crawford," the young makeup artist said softly, My mother has been a housekeeper all her life. What you're doing, it means everything to people like us. Eleanor reached up and squeezed the girl's hand. People like us, she repeated thoughtfully. That's exactly it. There shouldn't be any people like us or people like them. We're all just people deserving of the same respect, the same dignity. Victoria Chen arrived, her camera crew in tow. Ready to change the world? She asked, her professional demeanor barely containing her excitement. Elena stood, smoothing down her dress. Not a uniform, not designer wear, but something in between, something authentically her own. The world is already changing, she replied. We're just making sure everyone can see it. As she prepared to step in front of the cameras, Eleanor thought about all the mornings she had spent serving. Others, all the times she had kept her head down, all the moments she had chosen silence over truth. But today was different. Today she would speak not just for herself, but for every person who had ever felt invisible, overlooked, undervalued. The red light on the camera blinked on, and Elena Crawford, daughter of privilege, champion of the invisible, bridge between two worlds, began to tell her story to a world that was finally ready to listen. The Crawford Mansion's security room had been transformed into an impromptu media center, walls of monitors displaying news coverage from around the world. Elena's interview was being broadcast live across multiple networks, her words resonating with millions. I didn't choose this path to make a statement, she explained, her composure unwavering under the bright lights. I chose it to understand a truth about our society that you can only learn by living it. What I discovered was both beautiful and heartbreaking, the incredible dignity of people who are treated as invisible and the casual cruelty of those who choose not to see them. In break rooms and service corridors across the city, workers gathered around phones and tablets, watching one of their own speak truth to power. At the Waldorf, Mrs. Chen's niece, a junior sous chef, recorded the kitchen staff's reaction as Eleanor described her first days learning to cook in a professional kitchen. She burned herself 3 times that first week. Mrs. Chen's voice could be heard in the background of the video, but she never complained, never asked for special treatment. Now we know she could have ordered us around instead of learning from us, but she chose to earn our respect. The video went viral within hours, adding another dimension to Elena's story. It wasn't just about her revelation anymore, it was about the community that had unknowingly helped shape an heiress into an advocate. In his office, James Crawford fielded calls from fellow business leaders, some supportive, others concerned about the implications of Elena's movement. One conversation, however, stood out. James, the voice belonged to Sarah Montgomery, CEO of one of the largest hotel chains in the country. Your daughter has opened my eyes. I've just had a meeting with our HR department. We're implementing comprehensive changes in how we treat our service staff. Better wages, respect policies, advancement opportunities. Similar calls were coming in from across the industry. Elena's story had sparked something unprecedented, a moment of genuine self-reflection among the powerful. Meanwhile, Maxwell Richardson sat in his empty boardroom, watching his former peers distance themselves one by one. His phone lit up with a text from his sister. Maybe it's time to remember who you were before the money made you forget. The message hit him harder than any business loss. Memories flooded back of his mother working double shifts as a waitress to put him through school, of promising her he'd never forget where he came from. Somewhere along the way, he had broken that promise. Back at the mansion, Eleanor had finished her interviews for the day. She sat in the kitchen, her kitchen in many ways, sharing tea with Maria and the staff who had become her second family. Look at this, Maria said, showing her phone. The invisible no more hashtag had evolved into a full-fledged movement, with workers sharing stories of both mistreatment and triumph, of small dignities maintained in the face of casual cruelty. But it's not just complaints, Elena observed, scrolling through the feed. Look at how many people are sharing stories of solidarity, of community, of strength found in unity. Carlos, who had joined them after tending to his beloved roses, nodded thoughtfully. You've given people permission to be proud, Elena. Not just of their work, but of their worth. The kitchen door swung open and Martha entered with yet another update. The Stand Tall rally in Central Park has been approved by the city. They're expecting thousands. And Elena, she paused, her expression soft with pride. They want you to speak. Elena looked around the kitchen at the faces of people who had been her teachers, her friends, her family, in all the ways that truly mattered. I'll speak, she said firmly, but not alone. This isn't just my story anymore. Mrs. Chen stepped forward, her small frame straight with dignity. We will stand with you, just as you have stood with us. As the sun set over New York City, its light caught the windows of countless buildings where people worked tirelessly behind the scenes, cleaning, cooking, maintaining the machinery of luxury and commerce. But tonight something was different. In those windows, shadows stood taller, heads held higher, invisible no more. The revolution Elena had sparked wasn't one of violence or destruction, but of recognition and respect. It was a revolution of raised eyes and straightened spines, of voices finding strength in unity, of people remembering their inherent dignity and demanding that others remember it too. In her father's study later that night, Elena found James looking at an old photograph. Her mother at a charity gala, but not at the main table. Instead, she was in the kitchen, sharing laughs with the staff, her elegant gown incongruous against the industrial stainless steel. She would be so proud of you, James said softly. She always said that true change comes not from grand gestures, but from small moments of human connection. Elena touched the photograph gently. That's what tomorrow's rally is really about, isn't it? Not just demanding respect, but recognizing the humanity in each other. As night fell over the city, thousands of people prepared for the next day's gathering, each one carrying their own story of invisible strength, each one ready to stand tall and be seen at last. Central Park had never seen a gathering quite like this. As the morning sun climbed over the Manhattan skyline, thousands of people streamed into the Great Lawn. Housekeepers, cooks, gardeners, maintenance workers, doormen, and countless others who had long been the invisible backbone of the city's luxury lifestyle. Elena stood at the edge of the makeshift stage, watching as the crowd grew larger by the minute. Every major news network had set up their equipment, cameras ready to broadcast this unprecedented event to the world. Victoria Chen moved through the crowd, capturing intimate moments for her social media channels. A group of hotel maids, sharing stories, maintenance workers from competing buildings embracing like old friends, chauffeurs and doormen standing shoulder to shoulder. It's incredible, Maria whispered, standing beside Elena. Look at how many people came. Indeed, the crowd was diverse beyond expectation. Alongside the service workers were wealthy individuals who had come to show support, some of them former employers who had been moved by Elena's story to re-examine their own behavior. Business leaders stood side by side with their staff, many for the first time seeing them as equals rather than subordinates. Mrs. Chen approached, leading a group of kitchen workers from various hotels and restaurants across the city. Elena, look who's here. She gestured to a young woman in chef's whites, her niece who had risen from dishwasher to sous chef at the Waldorf. She says your story gave her the courage to accept the head chef position they offered her last week. She had been afraid she wouldn't be respected. Elena hugged them both, feeling the momentum of change in every interaction. Nearby, Martha was coordinating with event security, ensuring everything ran smoothly. The NYPD had initially been concerned about the size of the gathering, but the atmosphere was one of dignity and purpose rather than anger or protest. James Crawford arrived with a group of other business leaders, including Sarah Montgomery from the hotel chain. They had just announced a joint initiative to reform service industry practices, better wages, healthcare benefits, educational opportunities, and most importantly, strict policies against the kind of behavioral abuse that had been normalized for so long. Are you ready? James asked his daughter softly. Elena nodded, looking out at the sea of faces. Some she recognized from years of working alongside them. Others were strangers who had become allies in this movement for dignity and respect. All of them had stories of their own, of perseverance, of quiet strength, of maintaining their humanity in the face of dehumanization. As she stepped onto the stage, a hush fell over the crowd. The morning sun caught her face, and for a moment, she was struck by the significance of the moment. Here she stood, no longer hiding, no longer invisible, but not just as Elena Crawford, the heiress. She was every person in that crowd, every story of dignity in the face of dismissal. "Good morning," she began, her voice carrying across the lawn. "I look out at all of you today, and I see strength, I see dignity, I see humanity that no uniform can hide and no position can diminish." The crowd listened in rapt attention as she continued. "For years I chose to work as a housekeeper, not because I had to, but because I needed to understand something fundamental about our world. What I learned wasn't just about privilege or class divides. I learned about the extraordinary resilience of people who wake up every day, put on their uniforms, and do their jobs with pride and dignity, regardless of how others might see them." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Elena saw tears on some faces, recognition on others. "But this gathering isn't about me," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "It's about every person here who has ever swallowed their pride to keep their job. It's about every worker who has maintained their dignity in the face of disrespect. It's about every human being who has been treated as invisible but refused to disappear." She gestured to the crowd, to the faces she had worked alongside for years. "I see you. We see each other, and it's time for the world to see us too." The applause that followed was like thunder, rolling across the great lawn in waves. But it wasn't just applause. It was the sound of thousands of people standing tall together, claiming their dignity, refusing to be invisible any longer. As Elena continued her speech, something remarkable was happening throughout the crowd. People were sharing stories, exchanging contact information, forming networks of support and solidarity. This wasn't just a rally, it was the birth of a movement that would reshape the relationship between privilege and service, between visibility and worth. In the middle of the crowd, a group of hotel workers held up a banner that captured the essence of the moment. "Our worth is not measured by your wealth." The message spread through social media, becoming an instant rallying cry for workers around the world. The revolution Elena had sparked wasn't one of anger or revenge. It was a revolution of recognition, of human dignity asserting itself in the face of systemic dismissal. And as she stood on that stage, watching thousands of people stand tall together, she knew that this was just the beginning. As the rally in Central Park reached its peak, Maxwell Richardson sat alone in his penthouse office, watching the live coverage on multiple screens. The woman he had once mocked now commanded the attention of the nation, her message resonating far beyond the service industry. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing with messages from the board members. His position as CEO was no longer tenable. The company's stock had plummeted, major clients were pulling out, and his reputation lay in ruins. But strangely, these concerns felt distant now as he watched Elena address the crowd. "Mr. Richardson?" His assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Your sister is here to see you." Catherine Richardson walked into the office, her presence a reminder of a past Maxwell had worked hard to forget. "You look terrible, Max," she said, but her voice held more concern than criticism. "Come to witness my downfall?" he asked, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. "No," she replied, moving to stand beside him at the window. "I came to remind you of who you used to be. Remember when Mum would come home from her double shifts at the diner? How proud she was to be able to send you to business school." Maxwell's throat tightened. On one of the screens, Elena was introducing Mrs. Chen, who spoke about dignity in work and the value of every position. Her words hit uncomfortably close to home. "I forgot, Kathy," he admitted quietly. "Somewhere along the way, I became everything. We used to hate about the rich people Mom served. In Central Park, the rally had transformed into something more than a protest. Business leaders were taking the stage alongside their staff, making public commitments to change. Sarah Montgomery announced her company's new policies, drawing cheers from the crowd. Other executives followed suit, each announcement building momentum for systemic change. Victoria Chen's social media coverage had gone viral globally. Invisible No More was trending in multiple languages, with similar rallies being organized in cities around the world. The movement had struck a chord that resonated far beyond New York's service industry. Back in his office, Maxwell made a decision. "Get me a car," he told his assistant, "and call Victoria Chen. I have something to say." Catherine grabbed his arm. "Max, are you sure about this?" He nodded, straightening his tie. "For the first time in years, yes. It's time to remember who I am, who Mom raised me to be." At the rally, Elena was concluding her speech when Martha rushed to the stage with urgent news. "Maxwell Richardson is here," she whispered. "He's asking to speak." A murmur ran through the crowd as Maxwell made his way to the stage. He looked different somehow, humbled, human. Elena watched him approach, seeing not the arrogant man from the party, but someone struggling to find his way back to his true self. "May I?" he asked quietly, gesturing to the microphone. Elena studied him for a moment, then nodded. The crowd fell silent as Maxwell Richardson, stripped of his usual confidence, faced them. "My mother was a waitress," he began, his voice shaking slightly. "She worked double shifts at a diner to put me through school. She taught me about dignity in work, about treating everyone with respect." He paused, gathering himself. "Somewhere along the way I forgot those lessons. I became the very thing she warned me about, someone who thought money made them better than others." The crowd listened in stunned silence as Maxwell continued. "I can't undo what I did at that party. I can't take back years of treating people as invisible, but I can change. We all can change. And to start," he turned to Eleanor, "I'm not here to apologize for publicity. I'm here because your courage in standing up to me, in revealing your truth, made me remember my own." Elena felt the authenticity in his words, saw the genuine pain and regret in his eyes. This was not a calculated move to save his reputation. This was a man finding his way back to his humanity. And in that moment, she understood something profound about the movement she had helped create. It wasn't just about making the invisible visible. It was about reconnecting everyone with their fundamental humanity, about breaking down the barriers that wealth and status created between people. The revolution she had sparked was transforming not just those who had been invisible, but those who had chosen not to see. It was changing not just the served, but the servers, not just the powerless, but the powerful. As Maxwell Richardson stepped back from the microphone, a single pair of hands began to applaud Mrs. Chen, who had seen something of her own story in his words. Gradually, others joined in, not in celebration of his past actions, but in recognition of the human capacity for change and growth. The morning sun had reached its peak over Central Park, illuminating a gathering that had become something more than a protest, more than a rally. It had become a moment of collective recognition, of dignity reclaimed, of humanity remembered, of invisibility transformed into undeniable presence. 1 month after the Central Park rally, Elena sat in her newly established office in the Crawford Foundation's headquarters. The walls were adorned, not with expensive art, but with framed photographs of the people who had shaped her journey: the kitchen staff, the maintenance crew, the housekeepers who had become her second family. Victoria Chen sat across from her, reviewing the impact of their movement on a tablet. "The numbers are extraordinary," she reported. 20 major hotel chains have implemented comprehensive respect and dignity policies. 15 cities have passed worker protection laws. And the social media engagement? Still growing. Elena smiled, picking up a handwritten letter from her desk, one of hundreds she received daily. "Listen to this. Dear Elena, I've been a housekeeper for 30 years. Yesterday, for the first time, my employer invited me to sit at their table for lunch. They asked about my family, my dreams, my life. Your movement didn't just make us visible, it made us human in their eyes." The door opened and Maria entered, now wearing a blazer that identified her as the Foundation's Director of Worker Advocacy. The first class of scholarship recipients is here, she announced, her eyes bright with pride. The Crawford Foundation's Stand Tall scholarship program, established in the wake of the rally, provided educational opportunities for service industry workers and their children. It was just one of many initiatives that had grown from the East Aggie Invisible No More movement. Elena followed Maria to the conference room where 20 people, housekeepers, maintenance workers, kitchen staff and their children, waited nervously. Among them was Mrs. Chen's niece, who had recently been promoted to executive chef at the Waldorf. "Welcome," Elena began, looking at each face in turn. "You're here not because of charity, but because of your own merit, your own dignity, your own worth. This scholarship program isn't about lifting you up. It's about removing the barriers that should never have been there in the first place." As she spoke, she noticed James standing in the doorway, watching with quiet pride. Their relationship had evolved over the past month, growing stronger as they worked together to create real change in the industry that had shaped both their lives. Later that afternoon, Elena had an unexpected visitor. Maxwell Richardson, looking notably different in casual business attire, waited in the reception area. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, standing as she approached. The arrogance that had once defined him was gone, replaced by a genuine humility. "Not at all," Elena replied, leading him to her office. "How are things at the diner?" After stepping down as CEO, Maxwell had taken over his mother's old workplace, not as an owner, but as a regular employee. The media had initially treated it as a publicity stunt, but as weeks passed, his commitment to relearning empathy through service became evident. "It's enlightening," he admitted, settling into a chair. "Yesterday, a customer complained about his coffee being too cold. My first instinct was to remind him who I am, former CEO, Millionaire. But then I remembered my mother, how she handled such moments with grace. So I simply apologized and brought him fresh coffee." Elena nodded, understanding the profound nature of such a small moment. That's what this movement has always been, about recognizing the dignity in every interaction, every role, every person. "That's actually why I'm here," Maxwell said, pulling out a folder. "The Richardson Foundation, what's left of it, I want to donate it to your cause. Not for publicity, not for redemption, but because it's the right thing to do." Elena studied him for a moment, seeing the genuine change in the man who had once humiliated her. "Thank you, but I have a different proposal. Why not keep the foundation and redirect its mission? Focus on worker education, on changing corporate culture from within. You have unique insight now. You've lived both sides." Maxwell's eyes widened as he considered the possibility. "You'd trust me with that, after everything?" "This movement isn't about punishment or revenge," Eleanor replied. "It's about transformation. Your story, from privilege to humility, from blindness to sight, it's powerful. Use it." Their conversation was interrupted by Martha, who entered with urgent news. "Elena, you need to see this." She turned on the office television, where a breaking news report showed similar rallies erupting in cities across Europe and Asia. The movement had truly gone global, with workers everywhere standing up for their dignity and employers beginning to listen. "It's remarkable," Maxwell said softly, watching the footage. "You've started a revolution without a single act of violence, just by showing people their own worth." Elena shook her head, smiling. "I didn't start this revolution. I just helped people remember something they'd always known, that dignity isn't earned through wealth or status. It's inherent in being human." As they watched the global movement unfold on screen, Elena felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The invisible were becoming visible not through force or demand, but through the simple, powerful act of standing tall together, of refusing to let their humanity be denied. The afternoon sun streamed through her office windows, catching the framed photos on her wall, faces of people who had taught her more about strength and dignity than any business school ever could. In their smiles, their proud postures, their confident gazes, she saw the future she'd helped create, a future where no one would have to hide their worth behind a uniform or a position. 6 months after the Central Park rally, The Crawford Mansion's grand ballroom was transformed once again. This time, however, it wasn't for a society gala or a business function. Round tables replaced the usual formal arrangement, and at each one sat a mix of people that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Corporate executives alongside their housekeepers, hotel managers with their maintenance staff, chefs and dishwashers sharing the same space as equals. Elena stood at the podium, surveying the gathering with quiet satisfaction. The inaugural Dignity in Service Awards ceremony was about to begin, celebrating individuals and organizations that had made significant strides in transforming workplace culture. "A year ago," she began, "I stood in this very room and revealed my truth to the people who had worked alongside me for years. Today we gather not to celebrate my story, but to honor all of our stories, every person who has contributed to this movement for recognition and respect." In the audience, Mrs. Chen sat beside the CEO of the Waldorf, both of them beaming, with pride as her niece was announced as one of the recipients, not just for her culinary achievements, but for establishing a mentorship program for aspiring chefs from service industry backgrounds. Maria, elegant in her role as foundation director, announced the next category. The award for corporate culture transformation goes to Sarah Montgomery for implementing the most comprehensive worker dignity program in the hotel industry. As Sarah accepted her award, she shared the stage with members of her housekeeping staff, acknowledging them as partners in creating change rather than subjects of it. The applause that followed wasn't polite society clapping. It was the genuine appreciation of people who had witnessed real transformation. James Crawford watched from his table, sharing proud smiles with Martha. Their world had changed dramatically, but the change had brought something precious: authenticity in relationships, genuine connections across social barriers that had once seemed impenetrable. Maxwell Richardson was there too, seated with his former housekeeper, now the manager of his worker education program. His Richardson Foundation had indeed found a new purpose, focusing on bridging the gap between corporate leadership and service workers through experiential learning programs. Between awards, Victoria Chen's latest documentary played on large screens, a powerful collection of stories from around the world, showing how the Tout Invisible No More movement had sparked global change. Images of workers standing tall, of employers learning to see their staff as human beings, of communities coming together in new ways of mutual respect. Near the end of the evening, Elena presented a special award, the Isabella Crawford Memorial Scholarship, named after her mother. "My mother understood something fundamental about human dignity," she explained, her voice soft with emotion. "She knew that true worth isn't found in bank accounts or social status, but in how we treat each other, how we recognize the humanity in every person we meet." The scholarship went to a young woman whose mother had worked as a housekeeper for 30 years, a full ride to the business school of her choice. As she accepted the award, she shared her dream of creating a consulting firm specializing in workplace dignity and cultural transformation. After the ceremony, as guests mingled and chatted, Eleanor found herself back in the kitchen, the place where her journey had truly begun. Mrs. Chen was there, making tea just as she had done countless times before. "Full circle," Mrs. Chen said, handing Elena a cup, "but different now." Elena nodded, looking around the kitchen that had once been her hiding place and was now just another room where people could be fully themselves. Different in all the right ways. Through the kitchen windows, they could see the city lights, twinkling in the distance. Somewhere out there, countless other stories of dignity and transformation were unfolding. Countless other people were learning to stand tall, to see and be seen. The revolution Elena had helped spark wasn't over. It was just beginning, but it had already achieved something remarkable. It had reminded people of their inherent worth, had shown them that true change comes not from demanding respect, but from refusing to accept disrespect, from standing tall together in the simple, powerful truth of human dignity. 1 year to the day after the video that changed everything went viral, Eleanor stood in front of the newly inaugurated Crawford Center for Workplace Dignity. The modern building, with its transparent glass walls and open spaces, stood as a physical manifestation of the transformation that had swept through society. Inside, the walls of the main lobby displayed photographs documenting the journey. Maxwell's party, the Central Park rally, the global movement that followed. But more importantly, they showed the everyday moments of dignity. A hotel manager having lunch with his housekeeping staff, a corporate executive learning to make beds alongside service workers, children of domestic workers graduating from top universities. This isn't just a building, Eleanor addressed the gathered crowd at the opening ceremony. This is a beacon of hope, a reminder that change is possible when we dare to stand tall, when we refuse to accept invisibility as our fate. The center would serve multiple purposes: a training facility for corporate leaders to experience service work firsthand, an educational hub for worker empowerment programs, and a think tank dedicated to developing policies promoting workplace dignity. Maria, now a respected authority on worker advocacy, led tours through the facility. Here in our immersion center, she explained to a group of business executives, you'll spend a week working alongside service staff, not as a publicity stunt, but as a genuine learning experience. In one of the classrooms, Mrs. Chen was teaching a course on kitchen management that emphasized both culinary skills and human dignity. Her students included both aspiring chefs and veteran restaurateurs looking to transform their workplace culture. Victoria Chen, who had become the center's media director, was filming a documentary about the year of transformation. Elena, she called out, you need to see this footage from our global partners. On her tablet, videos played from similar centers that had opened around the world, in London, Dubai, Singapore, Sydney. The movement had evolved into a global network of change, each location adapting the principles of dignity and visibility to their local context. James Crawford watched his daughter from the back of the room, remembering the young woman who had once insisted on working as a housekeeper to understand the world better. Your mother would be so proud, he said when she joined him. She always said that true change comes from understanding, not judgment. I understand that better now, Elena replied, watching as Maxwell Richardson led a session on corporate transformation, sharing his own journey from arrogance to awareness. Sometimes we have to lose our privilege to find our humanity. Later that afternoon, Elena visited the center's most important space, a simple break room where service workers could come to rest, share stories, and most importantly, be seen and heard. The room was dedicated to Isabella Crawford, with a plaque that read, "In honor of those who taught us that dignity is not earned through status, but inherent in being human." As she sat there sharing coffee with a group of housekeepers from various hotels, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this point. The movement hadn't just changed policies or practices, it had transformed hearts and minds, had reminded people of their fundamental connection to each other. You know what's different now? One of the housekeepers said, her eyes bright with pride. It's not just that they treat us better, it's that we remember to treat ourselves better too. We stand taller, speak more confidently, know our worth. Eleanor nodded, understanding perfectly. The revolution they had started wasn't just about changing how others saw them, it was about changing how they saw themselves. The invisible had not only become visible, they had become luminous, lighting the way for others to follow. As the sun set over the city, casting long shadows through the center's glass walls, Eleanor watched people from all walks of life interacting with genuine respect and interest. Corporate executives listened attentively to maintenance workers sharing their experiences. Young scholarship recipients discussed their dreams with seasoned professionals who now saw them as equals. The world hadn't become perfect. There were still challenges to face, battles to fight, minds to change. But something fundamental had shifted. The barriers between served and server, between visible and invisible, had begun to crumble, revealing the simple truth that had always existed beneath the surface, the inherent dignity of every human being. Looking out at the city skyline, Elena thought about all the lives that had been touched, all the stories that had been transformed.